A very good evening to all the educators who are joining in for today's panel discussion. So the announcement of the NEP 2020 certainly came as a surprise to everyone in the education domain. Nobody had anticipated so big a revamp, and as every new change from the policy was revealed, it began to raise several questions in the minds of everyone. Every point, every suggestion is being reviewed critically under the broad categories of a hit or a miss. Mindler, in collaboration with Education World India, bring to you a panel discussion on NEP 2020, the hits and misses for school education. Now, the panel consists of industry experts, but I'm going to begin by introducing our moderator, who is Sumya. Sumya Yasmin is a co-founder and managing editor of Education World and Parents World, which is India's #1 parenting magazine. An alumni of the Asian College of Journalism, she has written extensively on challenges confronting the Indian education system and is also an author of the best-selling 101 Great Universities of the World. We welcome you, Sumya, and so do we welcome all our other panelists.
Thank you, Isha, for that very generous introduction. Good evening, and it's my pleasure to welcome our educators who are joining in, as well as introduce our distinguished panelists who will discuss and debate National Education Policy 2020, the hits and misses for school education. Let me begin by introducing Nooreen Fazil. Nooreen is the co-founder and managing trustee of Inventure Academy, Bangalore, and alumna of Boston University with professional work experience in the Reuters Group. She's worked almost across the world: Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Sydney, Hong Kong, New York. Nooreen returned to India to co-promote Inventure Academy, Bangalore in 2005. Inventure Academy is ranked among India's top 3 co-ed day schools in the Education World India School Rankings 2019-2020. And in last year, Nooreen also promoted the Inventure Preschool. Nooreen, welcome. Our next panelist is Damodar Goyal, who is the president of the Society for Unaided Private Schools of Rajasthan. A commerce graduate of Rajasthan University, Mr. Goyal is, like I said, president of the Society for Unaided Private Schools of Rajasthan, which under his leadership famously challenged the Section 12(1)(c) of the RT Act, which mandated all private schools to reserve 25% capacity in primary school for poor children. Their writ petition was partially upheld by the Supreme Court, which exempted minority-run private schools from the ambit of the RT quota. Mr. Goyal is also management consultant to a large number of private schools across the country. Mr. Goyal, a warm welcome to you.
Thank you.
Our next panelist is Dr. Amrita Vora, an alum of Lucknow University, who later qualified as a program leader for teacher professional development and educational leadership from Cambridge University. Dr. Vora is the Delhi-based Director Education of GEMS India, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Dubai-based Varki Group promoted GEMS Education. In India, the GEMS Group manages 11 K-12 schools. Dr. Vora is also the executive principal of the group's flagship GEMS International School, Gurgaon. Welcome, Dr. Vora.
Thank you.
And our next panelist is Mr. Kulbhushan Sharma, who is a graduate of Punjab University. Dr. Sharma is president of the National Independent Schools Alliance, which has a membership of 60,000 mainly budget private schools with an aggregate enrollment of 10 million children. Kulbhushan ji is a great advocate for upgrading private budget schools in the country and one of its leading voices. Kulbhushan ji, namaskar and warm welcome to you.
Sabhi Nisa Green namaskar.
Thank you. And I'd also like to welcome our special guest, Bhavan Shah, CEO of Education World. Okay, so let's begin. Like Isha said earlier, that the National Education Policy 2020 was approved by the Union Cabinet on July 29, formulated after an interregnum of almost 34 years and crafted over 4 years following the detailed recommendations of 2 high-powered committees, the T.R.S. Subramaniam Committee and the Dr. K. Kasturirangan Committee. The National Education Policy is a 65-page document. It sets out a grand vision to transform India into a global education superpower, and it proposes major reforms in school and higher education. Some of its highlights are that it gives long overdue primacy to early childhood care and education, high priority for functional literacy and numeracy of all children by age 8. It encourages holistic education with compulsory vocational learning. Exam reforms have been mooted to test children's comprehension, creativity, and critical thinking. Introduction of the continuous formative assessment system, and of course, promotion of new digital technologies uses in school education. So 1 month later, actually today is August 29th, 30th, so it's almost 1 month later, after the initial euphoria over this visionary charter for Indian education has settled down, the debate has moved on to implementation. This grand vision will need perhaps 1,000 new education committees, legislations, regulatory bodies, and most importantly, huge budgetary allocations to be transformed into reality. This is a policy, not a law. So the devil is in the detail of in the details of implementation. Noreen, I'd like to draw your expertise in first. How satisfied are you with NEP's curricular and pedagogical reforms in school education? And what operational and financial challenges do you see in implementation of especially the change in academic structure from 10+2 to 5+3+4? And the medium of instruction in a mother tongue local language, which the policy again has proposed.
Thank you so much for inviting me to this panel and for the questions. That's a lot of questions. How long do we have again?
You have 3-4 minutes.
All right, thank you. So really, I'd like to look at it from the following lenses. Is it desirable? Is it suitable? Is it feasible? So firstly, in terms of the desirability, it's 34 years since we had our last policy. Much has changed in India and across the world. So I think the time has definitely come for this education policy. We have the largest population of children and potentially the largest working population in the world. And the education system is failing. So is it desirable? Yes, absolutely. Particularly given that it promises to deliver on SDG 4, which talks about ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education and promises lifelong learning opportunities for all. The vision, I was very happy to see because it's something we've pushed very hard on. The draft really talked about an India-centered education. As you mentioned, it's now talking about making India a global superpower, a knowledge superpower. What I think is very critical and fantastic is that it redefines what it means to be a good school and a good society. I'm going to quote from the vision. It says the vision of the policy is to instill among learners a deep-rooted pride in being Indian. It goes on to then say that support responsible commitment to human rights, sustainable development and living, and global well-being, thereby reflecting a truly global citizen. So I think everything we look at about the policy, whether it's curriculum or anything else, has to be looked at the lens of the vision and the founding principles on the basis of which the NEP is based. So what I really love about it is, as you mentioned, the stage-wise implementation with a focus on early childhood care and education and foundation literacy and numeracy, because without this, the rest of what a child does in school or does not do is really meaningless. We have to get this right, and we have to get this right by 2025. Everything else which you mentioned, the move away from learning for a test to learning for life, the assessments which are going to take place, including the checks which are going to happen in grades 3, 5, and 8, I think are very welcome, because it will actually allow us to design policy interventions and education programs to make any changes. The lack of sort of differentiation between curricular and co-curricular, the sort of multidisciplinary approach, experiential learning, all of this is music to my ears, because we've been working on implementing on this for the last 15 plus years, and we can see the difference and the impact it's having on every child, and really keen to ensure that every child in India gets the benefit of this kind of education. Is the policy suitable? And particularly as far as language is concerned, right? I think we really need to look at from the perspective of, is it meeting the aspirations of parents, students, and educators? And I think this is where there's going to be tension in the policy, because it talks in two different tones. One is very sort of liberal. It talks about the need for autonomy, for attracting the very best to education, creating an environment of trust, and so on. The other tone is really more of the same, except it's a different alphabet soup, if you like. So you have a very sort of a potential for a very top-down controlling approach. So the Ministry of Education, whether it's public or private schools, we cannot just be franchisees for the Ministry of Education, right? It can't be that the why of education, i.e. the vision, is decided by the government. The what, where, when, how you learn, i.e. the curriculum, the textbooks which they've talked about in terms of sourced at cost at that, all of that, if it's all defined by the government, then what role do educators have to play? What choice do parents have? And really to drive innovation, you need that diversity of thought, of philosophy, of approaches even, right? So that's an area of concern. And language, I'm hoping, frankly, that the government will be practical. They have said that they're looking at creating India to be a global knowledge superpower. And I think everybody recognizes English in particular. So when they say that at least 2 languages have to be native to India, I think they recognize the social mobility and the aspiration of people. And equally, they recognize that in order to learn best, the language that you're exposed to as a child, be it home or the region that you belong to, your mother tongue, works best. I actually would like to see dual language schools actually come through. I think that'd be really good. And as far as the feasibility is concerned, frankly, India is reeling. We're reeling and we're looking at a negative 6 to 9% GDP growth this year, or rather, deficit. And this on top of demonetization, on top of the implementation of GST and lack of ease of doing business, irrespective of the World Bank report says, I think we're not going to find the funds in the next 2 to 5 years. But I think it's a brilliant aspiration to have as a country. And I think there's a lot of potential for all of us to work together collectively to make sure that every child gets a quality education.
Thanks,
I hope that
Noreen.
answers your question.
Yes, Noreen. Thanks a lot. You've raised, you've actually very beautifully summed up the hits and misses of the policy for our audience. We'll come back to some of the points you raised. Damodarji, I'd like to come to you now.
Yes, Soumya.
Yeah, many people were expecting that NEP 2020 will make a break from over-regulation of the K-12 education sector, but that has not really happened. In fact, NEP 2020 proposes the setting up of a state school standards authority, which is empowered not only to set standards, but also regulate schools, adjudicate any complaints or grievances against schools from anyone. There is no clarity on composition of this SSA, so state governments can pack them with bureaucrats, party loyalists, academics with suspect credentials. How do you see this panning out?
Yeah. We were expecting a lot from the new education policy, and rather I should say from the NDA government. When the NDA government came to the power, we all were expecting that there will be some more liberal policies for ease of doing the business and many other things. And everybody was expecting that there will be some groundwork will be done for inviting the private investment in the education. But all things had been shuttled down in one straw. The policy in no uncertain words says that there will be light but tight regulation regime. In very first introductory paragraph, they have written that there will be light but tight regulatory framework. And they have very candidly said that we want education by private parties, those who believe in philanthropic as a philanthropic activity. They have very clearly declared that there will be only and only schools for not-for-profit. They have very clearly declared that there will be a regulation for monitoring everything. So the regulations will be there. There will be monitoring right from the recognition to the learning outcome, to the management of the institution, to the qualification of everything. They have only in one paragraph, they have said that there will be autonomy for only four things: innovation, good governance, empowerment, and outstanding research. Otherwise, in the entire document, whenever they were talking about the regulation, they have made it very clear that there will be stringent regulations. And they have said that they don't want that education should be as a commercial activity. They have said that they want to save the parents from charging the exorbitant fee and add on and etc. etc. So now the private schools has to learn that how to work within the legal framework. If we are, and we were doing it, but our expectation was that at least there will be some enough occasion to breathe comfortably. But what I feel that now there will be more and more tight regulations on especially on the school education area. So that is my opinion about this one. And one thing I would like to say, when I have read the entire education policy, I have found it, and I have found it as an impressive matrimonial biodata. Looking for a good, beautiful, homely, cultural girl for a foreign returned boy, having income of the 7 figures, etc., etc. So it has a lot of aspirations, but there is, I am of the firm belief that there will be less and less achievement, because it is all beautifully worded policy document, but there is no mention that how we can improve the education. They have used certain terms that mother tongue, with mainstream, alternate, they teach. They have used many terms. But as far as, according to me, it is a like demonetization scheme, when we were expecting that lot of black money will come out. But what happened ultimately, that all the black money, more than black money, white money has become in the market. All the black money have become the white money, and in the more quantity than what it was in reality. So it is a good document, but I believe that it should have been thought more. There was more participation was required from the stakeholders.
Thank you, Damodarji. I love your description of the policy. I don't think so anyone has described it as beautifully as a matrimonial ad. Thank you so much. That's very interesting. We'll come back to some of the very, very valid points you've raised about regulation. In fact, in our latest Education World cover story, where we've done a cover story, that's what we've said. This is a visionary charter, educacy shadow, because they haven't been able to make a clean break from this command and control culture, which is deeply embedded in the Indian education and regulatory system. It's unfortunate that many of these grand vision and plans they have made, we won't be able to see the light of day. Dr. Vora, let me come to you now. One of the policies recommendations which has created a lot of excitement is in the area of teacher education, revamping teacher education. As you know, lack of qualified teachers is really the Achilles heel of Indian education. And in particular, the policies statement that a 4-year integrated BA degree program will be introduced, and all other forms of teacher qualifications will slowly be phased out. Are you satisfied with these teacher education reforms of NEP 2020? Should the policy have looked at, say, shorter duration programs also for grads and postgrads, lateral entry from other professions? I'd like your comment on this, because without highly qualified teachers, none of the objectives of NEP 2020 can be achieved.
Thank you, Sumya. That's a wonderful question, and being so passionate about teacher education myself, I think Noreen said a while ago certain things that sound like music to our ears as educators. You know, there is a lot in the vision of the policy that is really something that progressive educators across India, also apart from other parts of the world, have already been doing. We've been introducing those things and working with those things and ensuring that teachers are engaged and learn that way, and children get the benefit of all of that. But what has really been lost over the years is that sheer respect for the person, the teacher. Whether we talk about private school education or public school education or unaided or aided, whatever kind of schools, there is a shift in the way people look at this profession. And over the last decade, I think, and more, we have seen a sheer shortage of good teachers. There is discussion about this as well in the policy. The policy, to quote, clearly says teachers truly shape the future of our children and therefore the future of the nation. Today, however, the status of the teacher has undoubtedly and unfortunately dropped. So the policy recognizes it and states clearly that this needs to be revived, very strongly so. But when you look at the detail, as you said, devil is in the detail always. When you look at the detail, it is still talking about something as good as, yes, you know, within the government structure probably, all teachers will get merit-based appraisals. Now, when you look at what are the things that put in for merit-based appraisals, they are number of hours of CPD. Now, CPD or in-service training doesn't work with, you know, you specify 50 hours or 100 hours or whatever. You need to see what is the impact of that. You need to have very clearly defined impact indicators and how they are measured. There's going to be the teacher standards and so on, but we've had earlier policies which were talking about similar things and in very beautiful ways, but we've all seen how implementation really meant something else. It should not turn into that tick box approach that has been over the years. The other part of your question regarding the B.Ed, while it may be a good idea to have a 4-year integrated B.Ed program, when you look into the detail of the policy, it does say that somebody who's already got another specialization and already a BA degree or some other specialization in graduation can add a 2-year B.Ed. That will be available. It also says that somebody who got a master's or some other similar specialization can add a 1-year B.Ed. That will be available. Those options are given out there, but we don't know what will really happen in terms of implementation. They have also included within the PhD program, certain education training will be made mandatory into systems. So all of that is given and proposed, but there is ambiguity, because while this is said, there is also something very clearly said which says that the minimum qualification to join as a teacher will be the 4-year.
Yeah, absolutely.
So which one to agree? So supposing somebody is a PhD, what does that person do? As you said, lateral entry. I myself as an educator was a lateral entry into this field. I started with higher education, had a PhD and other things, and then later moved into school education. So then I did the B.Ed. And 2 years, doable. But will that be there, not there? So there's this confusion within the policy. We are yet
We can't hear you, Dr. Vora. We can't hear you. Can you just check? We can't hear you, please.
Is it audible?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
You're good now. Yeah. If you can just repeat the last sentence.
Yeah. So I'm just saying that, see, there is an ambiguity, and we are yet to see how the education boards, the NCERT and other bodies will finally translate this. When you look at the policy deeply, whether it is for teacher education or, as Sir very clearly mentioned, you know, for private and public sector, while the policy acknowledges that yes, lots of private schools are there and philanthropic private schools are doing good work, it also says that for-profit private schools should not be doing X, Y, Z. What is the way to assess which one is a purely for-profit private school and which one is not? Where how do they categorize? They have identified that there are a lot of teacher education standalone institutes who are providing teacher education degrees which are not at all reliable. And as school leaders, I think, or anybody who's run a school in India very well knows that we completely rely on training teachers on our own rather than any kind of, we have to follow regulatory systems. So therefore we appoint teachers who have a B.Ed. But we know that it does not mean that they know whatever is covered in that B.Ed curriculum. Unfortunately, that's a fact and everybody knows that. But then they're talking about stringent standards. They're talking about giving to these standalone institutions a lot of support in terms of they will have departments of English and science and mathematics and so on, apart from education. How much will that be possible for the kind of standalone teacher education institutes we have? How much of bureaucracy and other kinds of control will interfere with actual on-ground implementation? And what kind of teachers in terms of subject knowledge are we looking at in the future then? Subject knowledge is a given. We do need education knowledge for sure, and it should be there. It should be primal. But at the same time, you can't really have a teacher who does not know the subject. Pedagogy is certainly required, but the subject, you can't compromise on that. So a lot of discussion around this and reformulation on this may be necessary in your
Thanks, Dr. Vora. We'll come to some of the points you've raised. Kulbhushan ji, if I can come to you now. In this grand vision of Indian education, the contribution of private schools, which enroll 50% of India's school children, has not been acknowledged at all. They don't seem to exist at all, especially the country's 400,000 budget private schools, which enroll a staggering 65 million children. Kulbhushan ji, आप क्या कहना चाहेंगे इस बारे में कि प्राइवेट स्कूल्स का कहीं मेंशन ही भी हुआ है तो सिर्फ वो फिलैंथ्रोपिक एक्टिविटी के लिए, प्राइवेट स्कूल्स एग्जिस्ट ही नहीं करते?
सुमैया जी, आपने बिल्कुल सही बात कही कि इस एजुकेशन पॉलिसी में जो मेजर पार्ट है वो बजट प्राइवेट स्कूल है। जैसे अभी सेंटर स्केयर फाउंडेशन की रिपोर्ट भी आई कि 70% स्कूल्स जो है 1,000 रुपए से कम एजुकेशन दे रहे हैं, जबकि मेरा उससे मानना है कि शायद इससे भी कम पर वो एजुकेशन दे रहे हैं। उनकी एवरेज फीस जो होगी वो 600 to 700 या 800 होगी। और देश में जो मेरी कैलकुलेशन अपना, मैंने क्योंकि देश में बहुत भ्रमण किया है ऑन द खुद मैंने 10,000 स्कूल्स तो खुद विजिट किए हो, तो मेरा मानना है कि जो अभी ये 5 लाख के करीब इंडिया में स्कूल्स होंगे, जिसमें 24,000 के करीब सीबीएसई के स्कूल हैं, 2250 जो है आईसीएससी के स्कूल हैं, और इनमें भी 70% से ऊपर बजट स्कूल्स हैं। तो इनको इसमें इन्वॉल्व ही नहीं किया गया है। जो एजुकेशन पॉलिसी है इसमें इनकी राय ही नहीं ली गई। और एजुकेशन में जो बात की जा रही है कि फिलैंथ्रोपी, या इनको कहा जा रहा है कि ये लोग कमर्शियलाइजेशन कर रहे हैं, अगर बिल्कुल सही बात ये कही जाए तो ये तो 1/6 कॉस्ट पे एजुकेशन को प्रोवाइड कर रहे हैं, और गवर्नमेंट जो है 6 गुना ज्यादा 6 टाइम और मोस्ट कॉस्टली एजुकेशन दे रही है। तो कमर्शियलाइजेशन पहले बताइए कौन कर रहा है? क्या प्राइवेट स्कूल कर रहे हैं या गवर्नमेंट कर रही है? अगर इसका डायरेक्ट कोई डाटा ऐसा निकाला जाए, क्योंकि गवर्नमेंट ने ठीक है इस पे सेपरेशन ऑफ रोल की बात भी की है, एक्रेडिटेशन की बात भी की है, लेकिन हमें अभी भी डाउट है क्योंकि पूरी पॉलिसी के अंदर ना बजट प्राइवेट स्कूल्स की कहीं बात की गई है कि देश में बजट प्राइवेट स्कूल्स भी हैं, उसकी चर्चा ही नहीं की गई कि कितने % हैं। तो ये पॉलिसी कैसी बनी होगी? जैसे हिंदुस्तान में तो एक बहुत बड़ी ट्रेजेडी है कि डॉक्टर्स की अगर कोई पॉलिसी बनाए तो किसानों को दे दी जाती है, किसानों की पॉलिसी बनाए तो वो साइंटिस्ट को दी जाती है। अब एजुकेशन की जब पॉलिसी बनाई गई तो एजुकेशनिस्ट को इसमें शामिल ही नहीं किया गया, उनसे उनकी राय नहीं लेगी जिनका मेजर पार्ट है एजुकेशन के अंदर। हाँ, अगर कहीं बात की गई तो कमर्शियलाइजेशन की बात की गई तो उन्होंने कमर्शियलाइजेशन जो है किया। जो लोग 500-600 रुपए में एजुकेशन दे रहे हैं उनको कहा जा रहा है कि वो कमर्शियलाइजेशन कर रहे हैं। और जो 6,000 10,000 रुपया पर मंथ पे खर्च कर रहे हैं उनको कहा जा रहा है कि वो बहुत अच्छी एजुकेशन दे रहे हैं। तो ये एजुकेशन पॉलिसी में जो बात की जा रही है ये गले उतर नहीं रही। तो इससे आगे किस प्रकार से जो बात एक स्वप्न दिखाया जा रहा है उस स्वप्न में भी लग रहा है कि ये जल्दी टूटेगा। 36 इयर्स के बाद जो ये पॉलिसी 34 इयर्स के बाद जो पॉलिसी आई तो बहुत सारी उम्मीदें थी कि यहाँ पर एक प्रैक्टिकलिटी होगी, एजुकेशनिस्ट को बजट प्राइवेट स्कूल की इंपॉर्टेंस को समझा जाएगा। अब ये कहा जा रहा है कि सारी जो एजुकेशन जो रूल्स होंगे सबके लिए समान लगेंगे। समान कैसे हो सकते हैं? सवाल ही पैदा नहीं होता कि पूरे देश में हर एक के ऊपर, क्या आप कहते हैं कि इनकम टैक्स का एक ही स्लैब होगा? हर जो है इंडस्ट्री के ऊपर जो है बिजली का बिल एक तरह से, इलेक्ट्रिसिटी चार्जेस एक तरीके से लगेंगे, या हर आदमी को एक तरह से ट्रीट किया जाएगा? तो इस एजुकेशन पॉलिसी में जो है वास्तविकता की तरफ देखा ही नहीं गया। तो ये एक बहुत ही दुखद बात है। और इसका रिजल्ट क्या आएगा, क्योंकि देश का एक एक बच्चे को जो इस एजुकेशन पॉलिसी की जरूरत थी, अच्छी एजुकेशन पॉलिसी की, तो मुझे जो निशा के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से और बजट प्राइवेट स्कूल के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से, जब बजट प्राइवेट स्कूल की टीचर्स की पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से, जैसे अभी कुछ व्यूवर्स ये कह रहे हैं कि नेशनल पे कमीशन जो है टीचर्स को मिलना चाहिए, तो इस पॉलिसी के हिसाब से कैसे मिलेगा? और सबसे बड़ी चीज है कि इस पॉलिसी में ये स्कूल सरवाइव कैसे करेंगे, ये एक बहुत बड़ा इशू है जिसको एड्रेस ही नहीं किया गया। तो मुझे तो लगता है कि ये पॉलिसी जो है और जिस हालात में इसको पास किया गया, डिस्कशन भी प्रॉपर नहीं की गई, और ना ही जो है बजट प्राइवेट स्कूल्स को, जिनका मेजर रोल था, 70-80% जो इंडिया में एजुकेशन कैटर कर रहे हैं, उनको कहीं पर भी ना उनसे बात की गई, ना उनकी बात को समझा गया, ना उनकी बात को समझने की कोशिश की गई। तो मुझे तो इस एजुकेशन पॉलिसी में, क्योंकि जो हम बैठकर कभी भी वेबिनार्स पे बात करते हैं वैसे बात करते हैं, जो अच्छे स्कूल्स हैं, बेटर स्कूल्स हैं, उन पर तो बेटर अपॉर्चुनिटीज हैं, वहां पर पेरेंट्स के पास भी बेटर अपॉर्चुनिटीज हैं, वो अपने बच्चों को अब्रॉड भी भेज सकते हैं, वो अपने बच्चों को आईबी स्कूल्स में भी पढ़ा सकते हैं, अच्छे स्कूल्स में भी पढ़ा सकते हैं। लेकिन 80% स्कूल्स को जो एजुकेशन पॉलिसी 21st सेंचुरी की बात कर रही है, टेक्नोलॉजी की बात कर रही है, वो किस प्रकार मिलेगी, ये इस एजुकेशन पॉलिसी में कहीं डिस्कस ही नहीं किया गया। उल्टा प्राइवेट स्कूल्स को प्रॉफिट की, मैं तो कहता हूँ प्राइवेट स्कूल्स को प्रॉफिट के लिए आप डिक्लेयर कर दें। और दूसरा, प्राइवेट स्कूल कहा जा रहा है, जबकि स्कूल पब्लिक है सुमैया जी। जब हमें रिकॉग्निशन मिलती है तो पब्लिक के नाम से मिलती है। अब प्राइवेट स्कूल, अगर आप इनको प्राइवेट कहते हैं तो दुनिया में जो भी प्राइवेट है वो तो प्रॉफिट कर सकता है, फिर आप इससे क्यों कहते हैं कि आप प्रॉफिट नहीं कर सकते? अगर आप प्राइवेट कहते हैं तो प्रॉफिट अलाउ करें। और इनको जो मान्यता मिलती है, रिकॉग्निशन, वो पब्लिक के स्कूल्स के नाम से मिलती है। तो इस पॉलिसी में इन सारी चीजों को कहीं पर भी एड्रेस नहीं किया जा गया, जो हमारे लिए एक बहुत बड़ा कंसर्न है। आने वाले वक्त में देश के बच्चों के ऊपर इसका बहुत प्रभाव पड़ेगा। इसका वो जो बेनिफिट सोचा जा रहा है, वो बच्चा, जब देश के अंतिम बच्चे को वो बेनिफिट नहीं मिलेगा, तब तक वो एजुकेशन पॉलिसी को हम बेटर नहीं कह सकते। इस पे कुछ अच्छी बातें भी हैं, वोकेशनल स्टडी की बात की जा रही है, आप रोड लर्निंग से हटकर बात कर रहे हैं, एक्सपीरियंशियल एजुकेशन की बात की जा रही है, वो भी बात अच्छी है। जैसे अभी एक मैंने पढ़ा कि किसने कहा कि बेंगलोर में आप मदर टंग को कैसे डिस्क्राइब करेंगे, कि बेंगलोर के अंदर जो सिटी है उसमें तो मदर टंग जो है हो सकता है हर व्यक्ति की अलग अलग हो, और आप हिंदुस्तान में अगर मदर टंग की बात करेंगे, एवरी 20 किलोमीटर के बाद मदर टंग बदल जाती है। तो आप कैसे मतलब कि इस एजुकेशन पॉलिसी का जो ये ढांचा बनाना चाह रहे हैं और इससे रिजल्ट लाना चाह रहे हैं, इस पे बहुत ही संदेह जो है इससे दायरे में है। इसमें और अभी मंथन करने की शायद जरूरत है, और आनंद फानन में इसको कोविड के टाइम पे पास कर देना मुझे लगता है कोई उचित निर्णय नहीं है।
ओके, थैंक यू कुलभूषण जी। हम वापस आएंगे आपके कुछ ख्यालात पूछने के लिए दूसरे एस्पेक्ट्स में। Nureen, if I can just come to you now again, Nureen. The impression, everyone seems to be getting, a lot of educators whom I've spoken to, is that the policy seems to want to standardize a lot of things in K-12 education. And it seems to believe that, highly qualified educational school principals, people who have promoted these schools at vast amounts, know nothing about education. And that the setting of standards, monitoring, regulation, everything needs to be done by government set up regulatory bodies. if you could comment on that, and also what do you see as like a big miss of NEP 2020 for school education?
Thank you so much for the question. Firstly, I'm going to start with the big miss. Sure. Right? Or should I show you a blank page? But basically, page 33, the last point in the NEP on school education, it says, finally, the children, adolescents enrolled in schools must not be forgotten in this whole process. After all, the school system is designed for them. It goes on to talk about child safety. I think the policy, just by reserving one paragraph at the end, was like, by the way, I think that was a big miss, because I think that's absolutely critical. Children's welfare and well-being has to be central, because I think it's the social and emotional well-being which we need to address first, and everything else will follow. The second, really, I think, as Damodarji said, in this entire matrimonial, somebody forgot about private school educators. And as you mentioned, over 50% of children in India go to private schools. This is a country which has delivered a massive mandate for Prime Minister Modi twice. Clearly, we recognize the value of good leadership and good decisive leadership, right? So I think it's a bit strange that on the one hand, we're talking about the need to attract the best and the brightest. The other hand, we're basically saying somebody is going to tell you why you've set up the school in terms of the philosophy and the vision of the school. Somebody else is going to basically tell you what you're going to teach, when you're going to teach, the education approach that you're going to use, how you're going to assess. And the textbooks are going to be, as I mentioned earlier, they're going to be locally sourced. I mean, the schools like mine, we don't even use textbooks until grade 6, right? So to take away the freedom from a teacher who understands the child the best, and from an educator who has come up with a vision, who's co-created an educational institution and brought together different stakeholders, sort of, through a minefield of regulations, of the very negative perception of educationists, particularly private school educationists, there has to be some reward for the entrepreneurship. There has to be some recognition for the risk that private school educators are taking, and some recognition for the fact that what is failing our country today is our public school education system. When 60% of the people from the poorest sections of society are sending their kids to private schools and paying a fee for it, in a country like India where the net worth of the average Indian is no more than 7 lakhs, we clearly don't even have enough funds. We don't have enough people with the ability and the willingness to bring in philanthropic funds. So I don't understand this whole sort of distrust towards private school educators, particularly when parents are basically talking with their wallets and they're basically walking away from government schools to private schools. So why suddenly is this government school system, you're basically changing the names? I appreciate the fact that we are segregating the policymaker from the operator, the funder, and the accreditation authority. I really appreciate that, because I think it'll take away some conflict. But what I don't appreciate is the feeling and the perception that private school educators are just here to make money. And somehow everybody needs to be protected from them, from arbitrary fee increases, I think the draft said that teachers will be held accountable for what they do and do not do by the public, right? So we have to face the reality. India is in deep trouble. We're in deep trouble economically. We're in deep trouble in terms of education system. We're in deep trouble. I mean, I don't want to go beyond that, because I can see panelists saying that people are on this panel. I can see attendees saying that people on this panel are very negative. But the fact is, we have all invested our blood, sweat, and tears into Indian education. We understand our teachers and what motivates them. We understand children. We understand parents' aspirations. So give us the freedom to innovate as we've done in the past, to continue to innovate and really make India that knowledge superpower that the country aspires for. Help us ensure that every child gets a quality education so they can, at the very minimum, live a life of dignity. None of us want to see the scenes that we saw this time with the lockdown, where 70 million people just took to the streets to go back to their hometowns. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes,
Yeah.
Noreen. We also hope that, even though you say that in the policy they try to separate the roles of the operator and regulator. In fact, I want to come to Damodarji and raise that point.
It's the same people, though.
It's still the same people. I
Right.
mean, a person, if he jumps into a booth and puts a Superman uniform, clothes on, he's not going to change. It's the same people. We're looking for solutions. Damodarji?
Yes.
If I could, have your opinion on what I just said, that, it's still the same people. We're looking for solutions. It's the same old remedy. We're asking the same people who ruined our education system for the past 60 years, 70 years, to now again come with this new education policy and send this grand vision. And then we're asking them again for remedies and solutions. And they want to be still in control.
Yeah. Soumya, the entire education policy in relation to school education has been prepared keeping in mind only the government schools. If that is the objective, I welcome it. Because anyway, if there is some improvement in the government school through this document, we will welcome it. But how much the prejudice was in their mind, that I would like to quote paragraph 8.3 from the national policy.
Okay.
They have based on the presumption. I will read. The current regulatory regime also has not been able to curb the commercialization and economic exploitation by parents by many for-profit motive private schools, yet at the same time, it has also too often inadvertently discouraged public spirited private philanthropic schools. There has been far too much asymmetry between the regulatory approaches to public and private schools, even though the goal of the both type of schools should be the same, to provide quality education. But they should stick to their statement that the goal of the both kind of schools should to provide the quality education. So first they have to assess whether the government schools are able to provide quality education. And number two, the very important thing is that when the government is allowing private investment in every sector, including the defense sector, including the airports, including railways, then why you are treating education as a holy cow? No, it's untouchable for the private people. And if you want to do, you have to just give the green grass to the holy cows, and your role is only to provide green grass to these holy cows so that we can milk it. So that is wrong approach. Number two, the most important thing is that I would like to clarify that there is no strict direction or mention that we have to teach only in mother tongue. They have said wherever possible. So we need not to get scared. The word has been very, very consciously used, wherever possible. So it is left to the children, and I hope they are well aware with the judgment of the Karnataka Schools Association, choice of language.
Case.
Yeah, so that is why they have not done. But the most important thing is that if we want to improve the education, or we are only interested to improve the school education provided by the government, they have to be clear in their mind that what is their objective. Now, more and more infrastructure is required for the private schools, for the schools. I should not say private schools. Here in Rajasthan, recently the government has planned to open 2 English medium schools on the lines of the private school in each city. How many children they will be able to cater? 2 schools in a city of 50 lakhs population, they will be catering only 1,000 children. So are we going with the speed of that race? With that speed? So we will never be able to achieve the goal or dream to have a world-class education. We are, the 21st century is also running or passing through with the fastest speed. So we have to match with the speed in which the world is progressing. We can't think in terms of all these things. The only and only one thing which I saw in the entire policy, which is good one, that they have thought about allowing children to choose the stream at the class 9 level, which is the best proposition in the entire scheme. Because earlier what we were doing, we were giving all subject teaching and knowledge and which was required and may not be useful in their life up to the class 12, which is a child is attaining class 12 when he has attained the age of 18 years. So it is only one good thing which I have been able to find it.
Okay. Okay, thanks, Damodarji. Amrita, if I could go to you and quickly ask you to give what you think is the big miss of NEP 2020 in your opinion.
Yeah, so I will just take it forward from where Noreen has left it, and Damodarji also. I think I completely agree with both of them on a lot of things. What is very, very evident is that while the policy talks about revamping teacher education, it also talks about the shortage of teachers in certain ways. It talks about the appointment of para teachers. It talks about quality education needs to be there for all. Very, very true, public as well as private schools. But para teachers are there, Shiksha Mitra hai, and the para teachers are running the entire school practically for a very large number of government-run schools in the system. So the policy does recognize this and does point it out clearly, and also says that this needs to be changed, and they will be no longer there by 2030, and that's the goal, that's the vision. But how is critical here. They also say that the teacher education test, the TET, will be made more stringent. Now already the TET, barely 12%.
Less than 10%, pass percentage rate is less than 10%.
Yes. So already when you are not being able to get teachers, there's already a teacher shortage, which is very real, which is very much there for all kinds of schools in India and actually across the world also, because it's no longer a profession that somebody really wants to get into. It's not there. So then how are we saying that we'll make it more stringent and we'll be able to work on the shortfall as well? So both sides of the coin, how? I mean, so the how is not really discussed very clearly in the policy. Maybe it is left to others to figure it out. Then the next step is, whenever we talk about any policy, I think in a lot of places, policy talks about collaboration. We all need to collaborate. It does need to recognize that private schools, all the progressive private schools, many, a very large number of them in India have already been implementing this vision. Many of them have been started with similar visions, which do talk about quality education, which do talk about assessment in a certain way, which have moved away from rote learning practices, which are using experiential learning as the way to go, which are, very, very forward looking, and pedagogical environment is totally different, which is the reason why parents are preferring and moving into those kind of schools. But fact remains that private schools are already also under a lot of regulation. What it essentially often means, unlike various other countries, we have schools in Dubai, there is a very stringent regulation authority there. You have KHDA and there is a regulatory process. The school standards are maintained come what may, and they are rigid about it. But they don't stop private education. They are very, very clear about, okay, this is where it needs to, the government cannot invest all the money. We do need the funding and we do need people to come through, and it will be to an extent for profit. Similarly, in India, we do need a system around it. There is barely any audit system. And if there is, and whatever there is, it doesn't really check what it needs to check. It's a lot of paperwork that happens. And that is essentially what also led to that whole compromise with the CCE, which was again a very forward-looking idea, launched with good vision, but then implementation is where it failed, and ultimately things had to be changed. And again, there is a rethinking around all of this. So where are we thinking in terms of implementation if we are not even acknowledging the private school educators and all the private schools who really can lead the way within this country for the vision.
Rightly said, Amrita. Kulbhushan ji, if I can quickly come to you, अगर प्राइवेट बजट स्कूल्स को ये NEP का जो विजन है इम्प्लीमेंट करना है, तो ऑब्वियसली वी नो दैट द सेंट्रल स्क्वायर फाउंडेशन की रिपोर्ट ने कहा कि सिर्फ 70% ऑफ देम 70% ऑफ प्राइवेट स्कूल लेवी फीस लेस देन ₹1,000, and now the NEP 2020 has clearly said that one of the main objectives of all these regulatory bodies will be to stop to save parents from arbitrary fees increases. तो अगर ये 400,000 प्राइवेट बजट स्कूल्स अपनी फीस नहीं बढ़ा सकते हैं, तो ये जो ग्रैंड विजन है पॉलिसी का, ये पेडागोजी रिफॉर्म्स, करिकुलम रिफॉर्म्स, ये 5+3, 3+4 स्ट्रक्चर, ये सब कैसे इम्प्लीमेंट होगा?
सुमैया जी, आपने बहुत सही बात की और मैं बहुत शुरू से ये बात कहता हूं कि जब भी कोई पॉलिसी बनाई जाए, हमारे फादर ऑफ द नेशन महात्मा गांधी ने एक बात कही थी कि जब भी कोई नीति बनाई जाए तो देश के उस अंतिम व्यक्ति को देखकर, और शिक्षा नीति में कहने का मतलब अंतिम बच्चे को और अंतिम गरीब व्यक्ति को देखकर बनाई जाए जिसकी आत्मा प्यासी हो और पेट भूखा हो। तो इस नीति में इसका कहीं पर भी ख्याल नहीं रखा गया कि देश का जो अंतिम बच्चा बजट प्राइवेट स्कूल में पढ़ता है। बहुत सारे लोग सुनकर बहुत हैरान होंगे कि जो मेरी नॉलेज में आया कि इस प्रकार के बजट स्कूल्स भी हैं जो सिर्फ 50 रुपए फीस चार्ज कर रहे हैं मध्य प्रदेश में। यूपी में 50 से 100 के बीच में बहुत सारे स्कूल है जो 100 रुपीज चार्ज करते हैं। तो वो किस प्रकार, जिस एजुकेशन की बात की जा रही है कि ये एजुकेशन बच्चों को 21st सेंचुरी की एजुकेशन बच्चों को दी जाएगी, किस प्रकार वो दी जा सकती है। और जो आज हमें पता लग रहा है कि हम 50% के स्टेक होल्डर हैं। मेरा गारंटेड मानना है कि हम 50% नहीं, हम 60% के स्टेक होल्डर हैं। 60% बच्चों को हम पढ़ा रहे हैं, क्योंकि पीछे कैग की ये रिपोर्ट आई थी कि सिर्फ यूपी के अंदर एलिमेंट्री के अंदर 1,11,00,000 एनरोलमेंट गवर्नमेंट स्कूल में फेक हैं। हरियाणा में जब आधार से लिंक किया गया था तो 4.5 लाख बच्चे फेक मिले थे। तो अभी उसको दुरुस्त तो किया नहीं गया कि एक्चुअल में क्या डाटा है प्राइवेट स्कूल में। अब मेरा गारंटेड ये मानना है कि 60% बच्चे बजट प्राइवेट स्कूल्स में पढ़ रहे हैं। तो जो ये स्वप्न दिखाया जा रहा है एजुकेशन पॉलिसी में, हमेशा जब बात की जाती है, हम किसी भी कॉन्फ्रेंस वेबिनार्स में जहां पर भी जाते हैं गवर्नमेंट की मीटिंग में, तो वो चाइल्ड सेंट्रिक अप्रोच की बात करते हैं कि जो पॉलिसी होनी चाहिए वो चाइल्ड सेंट्रिक होनी चाहिए। लेकिन चाइल्ड सेंट्रिक अप्रोच को टोटली इग्नोर किया गया है। क्या इस पॉलिसी से आप बताएं कि जो 60%, जो मेरा कहना है, जो स्कूल 6,000 से साल के जो है 10,000 से कम फीस चार्ज कर रहे हैं, 60% स्कूल मेरे हिसाब से होंगे, वो किस प्रकार ये जो आज आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस की बात की जा रही है, 21st सेंचुरी की बात की जा रही है, रोबोटिक्स की बात की जा रही है, कोडिंग की बात की जा रही है कि 6th ऑनवर्ड कोडिंग जो है बच्चों को सिखाया जाएगा, तो ये किस प्रकार उन बच्चों तक पहुंचेगी, इसकी बात कहीं एजुकेशन पॉलिसी में नहीं की गई। बेहतर ये होता कि चाइल्ड सेंट्रिक अप्रोच बनाकर, जैसे बहुत सारे लोग इस पे भी अभी सवाल कर रहे हैं कि MLA MPs अपने बच्चे गवर्नमेंट स्कूल में क्यों डाले। भाई क्यों डाले? वो हर एक को अपनी चॉइस होनी चाहिए। स्कूल चुनने की चॉइस भी इस पॉलिसी के अंदर कहीं भी पेरेंट्स को नहीं दी गई है। और जब तक स्कूल के पेरेंट्स को चॉइस नहीं दी जाएगी और चाइल्ड सेंट्रिक अप्रोच नहीं बनाई जाएगी, और हमारा जो नीसा का मानना है कि डायरेक्ट बेनिफिट ट्रांसफर जब तक एजुकेशन में नहीं किया जाएगा, तो ये जो मिस यूज ऑफ फंड्स हो रहा है इसके बारे में कहीं पॉलिसी में बात नहीं की जा रही कि बजट प्राइवेट स्कूल, जब असर की भी रिपोर्ट आ रही है कि प्राइवेट स्कूल इज परफॉर्मिंग बेटर देन गवर्नमेंट स्कूल, ये रिपोर्ट तो आ रही है। तो जब वो बेटर परफॉर्म कर रहे हैं तो मिस यूटिलाइजेशन ऑफ द फंड्स, पब्लिक के पैसों को मिस यूटिलाइज क्यों किया जा रहा है, इसकी कहीं चर्चा नहीं है। तो ये जो पॉलिसी में जो इन चीजों को जो इग्नोर किया गया है, मिस किया गया है, इससे देश के अंतिम बच्चे को, और मेजॉरिटी जो हिंदुस्तान में जो देश बसता है वो गांवों के अंदर बसता है। सिर्फ शहरों से आप देश की कल्पना नहीं कर सकते, कुछ शहरों के उससे। हिंदुस्तान ज्यादातर गांवों के अंदर बसता है। तो जो गांवों के बच्चों को किस प्रकार से, या एक बजट प्राइवेट स्कूल में पढ़ने वाले लो इनकम ग्रुप के बच्चे को किस प्रकार चॉइस की एजुकेशन मिलेगी, 21st सेंचुरी की एजुकेशन मिलेगी, और किस प्रकार देश के टीचर्स जो हैं उनको अच्छी सैलरी मिलेगी, इसकी कहीं चर्चा नहीं की गई। उनकी रिस्पेक्ट की कहीं बात नहीं की गई, उनकी डिग्निटी की कहीं बात नहीं की गई। और जो बीएड का भी 4 साल के इंटीग्रेटेड कोर्स की जो बात की जा रही है सुमैया जी, उसके बाद भी गवर्नमेंट को अपने पर विश्वास नहीं है। इसके बाद भी वो कहते हैं टैट होगा, टीचर एलिजिबिलिटी टेस्ट होगा, कि आप इतनी बड़ी पॉलिसी बना रहे हैं इतने सालों के बाद, 3 डिकेड्स के बाद, उसके बाद भी आपको अपनी पॉलिसी पे खुद विश्वास नहीं हो रहा कि जो आप एजुकेशन देंगे उसके बाद भी टीचर को फिर एक और परीक्षा से गुजरना पड़ेगा। तो ये जो पॉलिसी है ये देश के अंतिम बच्चे को ना तो क्वालिटी एजुकेशन देने की बात कर रही है, ना उसको चॉइस की बात कर रही है, ना उसकी अपॉर्चुनिटी की बात कर रही है, ना टीचर को कैसे डिग्निटी और उसकी रिस्पेक्ट बहाल होगी, और किस प्रकार वो फाइनेंशियली भी एट पार आ पाएगी गवर्नमेंट स्कूल्स के टीचर के, उसकी भी बात इस पे नहीं हो रही। अगर ये चाइल्ड सेंट्रिक अप्रोच इस पे की जाती जिसकी हम बार बार मांग कर रहे हैं, तो शायद डायरेक्ट बेनिफिट ट्रांसफर एक बहुत अच्छा एक उपाय था, जिससे एक हेल्दी कंपटीशन क्वालिटी का आपस में होता, कि जब बच्चों के पास चॉइस होती, पेरेंट्स के पास चॉइस होती, तो ये इतना सारा जो ये तामझाम करने की जरूरत, अरेंजमेंट करने की जरूरत पड़ रही है, कर रही है गवर्नमेंट, बात कर रही है, उसको करने की जरूरत ना पड़ती। ऑटोमेटिक एक हेल्दी कंपटीशन स्कूल्स के अंदर होता, और स्कूल्स को फॉर प्रॉफिट करने में भी क्या दिक्कत है। हम तो खुद कह रहे हैं कि एक तरफ स्कूल्स के ऊपर ब्लेम लग रहा है, आप इन पे प्रॉफिट, इनके ऊपर टैक्स चार्ज कीजिए, और उस टैक्स को चार्ज करके आप एक फाइनेंस कारपोरेशन बनाए। अगर सरकार नहीं चलाना, इनसे टैक्स नहीं, प्रॉफिट नहीं करना चाहती, तो स्कूल से प्रॉफिट लेके एक फाइनेंस कारपोरेशन बनाए, और उस फाइनेंस कारपोरेशन से उन स्कूल्स को दोबारा जो है लोन दे जो क्वालिटी में अच्छा काम कर रहे हैं, ताकि देश के अंतिम बच्चे को क्वालिटी एजुकेशन मिले। और यही एक बेहतर तरीका है जिसको पॉलिसी में टोटली मिस किया गया और कहीं एड्रेस नहीं किया गया। तो इसका रिजल्ट भी आने वाले फिर 20-30 साल के बाद दोबारा मंथन होगा, और जैसे पिछली पॉलिसीज को जो है गलत कहा जा रहा है, फिर दूसरी जो सरकारें आएंगी इसको गलत कहेंगी, लेकिन नुकसान किसका होगा? देश के अंतिम बच्चे का जनरेशन टू जनरेशन नुकसान होगा, जिसको कहीं पर भी यहाँ एड्रेस नहीं किया, टोटली मिस किया गया है। चाइल्ड सेंट्रिक अप्रोच और गरीब व्यक्ति की अप्रोच को कहीं भी ध्यान में इस पॉलिसी में नहीं रखा गया, जो मिसिंग है टोटल।
Okay, thank you, Kulbhushan ji. I don't think so, Bhavin, we can do justice to the NEP 2020 in 1 hour, but I think we've done well. We've presented a wide diversity of perspectives. Over to you. I can see a lot of comments. A lot of them are saying that, you know, we're being very negative and we should give the policy time to be implemented. It's going to happen slowly, like everything in India. Bail gaadi ki tarah, hum bhi jayenge.
True.
But over to you, Bhavin, to take questions. And of course, if you'd like to make any comment on what we've discussed, more than welcome.
Soumya, with the House of Scholars and you being the monitor, probably I think let me be taking some liberty of doing some mischief in this classroom and allow my sarcastic nature to reply, right? Most importantly, this policy is, you see, government is very foresighted, you know. People don't acknowledge that. It's very intelligent. The timing of the policy is such where center and state both have no money and all the budgets have been slashed and nothing is going to come in anyone's kitty after COVID and post-COVID. The kind of allocations, they've already, center has told the states, don't ask for budgets. We're going to slash your budget nearly to 60-70%. So I should salute the government on the best timing that they have chosen, and they have really done good justice by bringing the policy during this time. Most importantly, why are we asking about the private education hero which is not present? Why do you want a hero? Because government is the heroine, and now is the day and date time of the heroine to see the role. But most importantly, there are very effective heroes in this policy. Namely, the number one hero is the Mr. SQAF, that is the School Quality Assessment and Accreditation Framework, followed with 3 major important people. And they are the CRC, that is the cluster head. You have the BRC, the block head. And then you have Mr. Diet, DIET, that is a district head. Now, with so many heroes already having, why do you need any private education's role to be coming here, right? So obviously they have included lot many other people who are going to take it. And most importantly,
you've rightly said, in fact, that point needs to be reiterated that this policy, though it has come at the time of the COVID pandemic, and when Indian education is so severely hit and struggling to recover from this pandemic, there's no mention of this pandemic at all. An estimated 20 million children we're expecting to be drop out of school. We need to first bring them back into school.
So while doing this, I think so one of our famous scientists who was thinking about making this policy was very impressed with a movie called 2.0. Have you heard of a movie called 2.0? That's the Rajnikant and Akshay Kumar's one of the famous movie, which was dubbed in 15 languages. Okay. And that's where they thought this multilingualism is going to be very easy, because if Rajnikant and Rajni sir can easily do it, probably multilingualism, anyone can speak multiple languages. Probably it missed to understand that how this is going to be implemented. Is it just going to be instructional, or it has a heavy component of assessing multiple languages and encouraging languages. So lastly, there is an effective, because not only private education was missing, but sports is missing. And that's where government knows very well how to play the chess game. You have not noticed saying there is an effective chess game embedded in it, where the center and state, there is going to be an effective play between the center and state, how they are going to really do this chess movement. Each and everything which is mentioned in this beautiful document, we know that eventually it's going to be the state who's going to implement. And let me tell you, center is going to be keep their head high, that how state is going to implement, we're going to see it. And that's where you have no clue that why sports is missing, because they want state and center to play the game. With this, let me open the house with a lot of these questions. And my first question goes, in fact, let me take it to Damodarji. In fact, Damodarji, you have many questions to be answered, but I'll try to distribute it to all the panelists. And this first question is on this efficient resourcing and effective governance through the school complexes. The complication of the matter is expansion of school under SSA, Sarva Shikshan Abhiyan or Samagra Shikshan Abhiyan, and RT requires to have access within 1 kilometer. How can state organize integrated school complexes without impacting access negativity or negative?
You have made a very, very valid point. And what they are saying that the head of the cluster will be the senior secondary school.
Correct.
And the other members will be the primary school or the middle schools. So you are putting apple amongst bananas.
Correct.
Something which are not compatible, number one. Number two, here also you are not taking expertise services of the private schools. In fact, I have in writing offer to the government that we are ready to assist you in establishing the good English medium schools, but they have declined because everything they want to institutionalize. The whole thing is that this policy has, in other sectors, we have open policy. We are doing away with the bureaucratic system and everything. But in this policy, every step has been institutionalized. Every step. And that is the problem, that this education policy is not going to yield any result.
True. Okay, so that's a very...
will not work at all. Again, it will be eating and resting.
Okay, let me come to Nurain. This is from Subhash, and this is on the, I'm merging 2-3 questions because there are a lot of opinions that have come, and this is on largely the topic of standard setting and accreditation for schools. Okay, so Nurain, the question and the complication over here is how comprehensive system of school accreditation be implemented across all the schools. See, the matter over here is the framework of the school standards are often not suitable to the state, lack of adequate numbers of competent assessors. So how do you see a comprehensive system of school accreditation be implemented across all the schools?
Thank you for the question. I think what I saw from the document, and I was trying to scramble to that section, but there was a rather unfortunately named SSA. And then there's, of course, the NCRT, right?
SCRT.
From what I saw,
NCRT and then SCRT.
SCRT, right? So they're going to both be setting standards, and they're both going to do some sort of an audit and accreditation. And I think it's going to be a 5-year cycle. So yeah, I think it's a very good question, given the whole inspector thing that you talked about, Bhavin, and the Inspector Raj. I think, it takes me back to when Damodarji and I were sitting down in Supreme Court with the RTE. And one of the objections which was raised at the time was that this 25% is going to go up for sale. Do you remember that, Damodarji? And the Chief Justice at the time said, we recognize that, I forget the precise words, but something on the lines of, we recognize that this is a practice, but we can't set law based on this, right? So my fear for the NEP and for all the concern about the so-called negativity, let me tell you this, I love the vision, the founding principles, the kind of curricular approach that they're talking about. I think it's a brilliant matrimonial, Damodarji, and maybe I should have had whoever wrote
I will be celebrating celebrating my golden jubilee wedding anniversary next year.
Yes, I saw that on Facebook. Congratulations.
So Nurain, I think so. It's not the Inspector Raj, but these are the heroes of the movie.
Right. Well, the heroes of the movie.
Yes.
I grew up watching Bollywood movies where a lot of inspectors ran around playing heroes. But my point is, the failure of the RT was that the government did not take along the private schools, right? And bulk of India, whether you like it or not, studies in private schools, and the aspiration is to study in a private school. We don't want to wait another 10 years to find out that this is failing, right? So I think it's very, very critical that the government truly creates an ecosystem of trust and collaboration, because there's simply too much at stake here. Okay. So whether it's and my big concern with the kind of standards that they're talking about, again, I think is because I read the draft policy and I understand the intent and the distrust. But when they say that, they've come up with a whole list of things that need to be shared in the public domain and open to general public. Now, my question is, does the general public have the maturity and understanding of education institutions? Everybody has an opinion. Everybody has an opinion on politics. Everybody has an opinion on schools. But that does not qualify us to be education minister or prime minister, right? In the same way, just because you have a kid or just because there's a school in the neighborhood that you're aware of, it doesn't make you an expert in education. I'll give you an example of the kind of investments that we made at Inventure. We set up a makerspace lab at an I'm not going to go into the numbers, but they run into crores, right? We set up rainwater harvesting because we recognize that we have a situation in Bangalore where we have a shortage of water. Now, if you were a parent with a kid, say in grade 11 or grade 12, would you have seen the requirement for the school to invest in that rainwater harvesting when we did? You may have turned around and said, and quite rightly so, hey, this is not my concern. It's not going to benefit my child. So I think education institutions have to basically put their money where the mouth is in terms of vision. And equally, the government needs to do this, right? So let's not make the same mistake that we did with the RTE, with this us versus them approach. It benefits nobody.
Okay, thank you very much, Nurain. Let me come to Kulbhushan ji and then to Dr. Amrita. So I'll have 2 to 3 questions maximum. Kulbhushan ji, the question is like this. How can schools be incentivized to participate in evaluation, that is internal and external, and utilize the feedback report to plan for continuous improvement? बहुत सारे budget school के अंदर ये जो internal और external assessment की बात कर रहे हैं, ये किस तरह से इसको assessment किया जाए? क्या private budget schools, what do you want private budget schools, how there could be an assessment done so that continuous improvement of quality happens?
भावन जी, मैं तो बहुत स्पष्ट ये असेसमेंट्स के जो ये पैरामीटर्स हैं, इनके उस पे नहीं जाना चाहिए कि क्या पैरामीटर्स होने चाहिए. जैसे आपने भी कहा कि इंस्पेक्टर राज है, करने वाला कौन होगा, किस प्रकार से करेगा। तो ये असेसमेंट्स हम जब रिकॉग्निशंस के प्रोसेस से गुजरते हैं तो वहां पर भी एक असेसमेंट होती है कि स्कूल की, उसकी इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर की असेसमेंट होती है, उसकी क्वालिटी की, उसकी हर चीज की असेसमेंट। तो उस सारे पैरामीटर्स को हम जानते हैं कि असेसमेंट किस प्रकार से होती है और कैसे उसको अप्रूव किया जाता है, कैसे उस पर मार्क्स मिलते हैं और कैसे आदमी गो थ्रू उससे आगे हो जाता है। तो असेसमेंट की बात जो हम सीधा स्पष्ट नीसा का एक साफ वर्जन है कि असेसमेंट और इवेल्युएशन की सारी पावर पेरेंट्स के पास देनी चाहिए, कि पेरेंट्स एवेल्युएट करें किसी स्कूल को, पेरेंट असेस करें, तो अपने आप स्कूल्स की असेसमेंट जो है वो बेटर होगी। बाकी आप कोई भी मेथड्स लगाएंगे, एक्रेडिटेशंस की बात लगाएंगे या किसी भी असेसमेंट, जैसे आज एग्जाम की असेसमेंट की बात जो है वो भी संदेह के घेरे में, और मैं उसका बहुत बार चश्मदीद गवाह हूं कि उस असेसमेंट में भी हमें जो है विश्वास नहीं होता कि बच्चे की जो एग्जाम में भी असेसमेंट की जाती है वो फेयर की जाती है कि नहीं की जाती। तो जो असेसमेंट का तरीका है वो बहुत सारे पेरेंट्स भी, मैं इसमें देख रहा हूँ जो व्यूवर्स भी डाल रहे हैं, कि असेसमेंट का तरीका पेरेंट्स के हाथ पे छोड़ना चाहिए। ये डेमोक्रेटिक कंट्री है, इसके अंदर जब एमएलए और एमपीज को जो असेस पब्लिक करती है, तो स्कूल को भी असेस करने का जो पावर है या उनकी जो फ्रीडम है वो पेरेंट्स को दी जाए, तो स्कूलों को सही ढंग से असेस भी किया जा सकता है। जो क्वालिटी एजुकेशन की बात बार बार जो है लोग भी उठा रहे हैं, तो वो क्वालिटी को भी असेस कर सकते हैं। हर चीज को पेरेंट्स से ज्यादा बेस्ट असेसर कोई भी नहीं है।
तो जैसे हमने एजुकेशन वर्ल्ड में इंडिया स्कूल रैंकिंग, इंडिया बजट स्कूल रैंकिंग, जो पेरेंट्स से जितने अभिभावक हैं वो लोग रेट करते हैं डिफरेंट पैरामीटर्स पे। सो यू आर राइट दैट पेरेंट्स शुड बी गिवन मच मोर एम्पावरमेंट टू डू द असेसमेंट ऑफ
मैं
द
आपकी
स्कूल्स।
असेसमेंट इसकी प्रेज भी करता हूं, क्योंकि बिल्कुल फेयर असेसमेंट होती है। आप पेरेंट्स से, टीचर से, प्रिंसिपल से बिना किसी को कहे, कोई एक ऐसी एजेंसी नहीं है जो असेस करने जाएगी। अगर कोई एजेंसी असेस करने जाएगी तो वो फेयर असेसमेंट नहीं होगी। तो ये फेयर असेसमेंट का तरीका ही है जो एजुकेशन
Fair
अवार्ड
point, sir. Fair point. Parents are the ultimate. Dr. Amrita,
के लिए पब्लिक एक बेस्ट असेसर है, और इस पॉलिसी में उसको टोटली फिर इग्नोर किया गया। ना बच्चे का ख्याल किया गया, ना पब्लिक को जो है इतना, कहीं पर कहा गया कि पब्लिक ठीक है, कहीं पर कहा गया कि पब्लिक को नॉलेज ही नहीं है।
सही बात है सर। Dr. Amrita, two questions very quickly. These are on teacher education. This is a comment and related with it, if you can give your viewpoint. Unless a quality framework linked to incentive and continuity is not created for teachers education, then it's unlikely the situation would improve for the teachers. Do you believe this?
Well, there has already been a quality framework in place. They are only going to review and revise it.
Would it be linked with incentives? Then there is motivation.
Yeah.
So is there an incentive for it?
Yeah, so currently, no, it wasn't there. And now the new policy does talk about it being there. It will be in place. But as you very clearly mentioned earlier, there is no budget for it. And there is not going to be, as we all very clearly understand. So in words, yes, the status of teachers needs to be improved, and the policy discusses that very, very clearly. It does talk about, yes, there needs to be this change, and there need to be quality standards, and they need to be implemented, and appraisal of teachers needs to account for CPD, number of hours put in. It needs to account for, it does not, however, state that, just the CPD number of hours put in does not necessarily mean that the teacher may be actually implementing that in the classroom. Does not necessarily mean that it is actually resulting in an impact on the child who is attending that classroom. So impact assessment is not really accounted for in any way. That needs to be built in. We all understand in teacher education that joint practice development is the only way it really works in any school, and only that's how it grows. That kind of system is not talked about. Again, 50 hours is what we need. Well, in private schools, we all know that we put minimum 108 hours or 120 hours per year, and even that is never enough, because continuous training of teachers happens only when they work together in a collaborative way, and everybody works in a certain kind of school culture which is created around them, and then that pedagogical shift happens. There is a much more huge shift required in education as per the vision of this policy when we look at the government or the public school setup. the larger picture, or the budget schools also for that matter to a great extent. We are talking of a teacher earning a salary of something like 2,500 a month. And we are expecting the moon out of this person. And we are saying we'll respect this person and so on and so forth. There should be XYZ, but then how? And what kind of systems and impact indicators are we really putting together? They can be standards, but how are we measuring those standards? Well, I also completely don't agree that only parents can be a good way to measure. Parents also are not educators. They just like all patients can't decide what kind of medicine they should get. And educator is also a professional. And this is a profession as much to be respected. Not everybody can suddenly become a judge. So you have to give that respect and honor to the education segment, and the impact indicators need to be thought through, and how they're going to be implemented, that ways of measure, the external agencies that can measure, maybe unbiased kind of agencies that can really bring in those kind of assessments. We have had assessments within our school systems, but we performed really sadly in PISA. And that's why we're talking about all that today.
So following with that, the change and the shift that we're talking is the last question on the B.Ed, because many questions have come on what's going to happen to B.Ed. So are you of the opinion that B.Ed should be liberated and we should have other professionals also in the teaching? Schools should be opening up, or India or the policy should be opening up gates for other professionals also to come in the teaching field?
Definitely. I think any progressive country where education's really flourished has done that. And that's one very important thing to be done, because at the end of the day, the teacher is the person imparting knowledge, has to have subject knowledge and clarity on whatever they are teaching. If they are supposed to ignite interest, ignite that spark, help children innovate, think creatively, they first of all have to have a bandwidth of thinking like that, of researching on that subject to a great extent, and then they'll be able to impart that. Alongside, they need pedagogical training, which has to be done, and practical aspects of it rather than theory are way more important. So they need to be considered instead of thinking, oh, we need a 4-year or a 5-year or a 3-year, what kind of structure to it. There's already a structure. We just need to implement it more appropriately.
So I hear your clear voice about having also professionals joining in this teaching field. Thank you very much, and thank you all the scholars to allow me to question you, and over to you, Sumya, because we've already shooted
yes,
up.
Pavan, I'll quickly wind up. I know we've overshot. Just to conclude, I think we all are in agreement, all our panelists, including myself and even you, Bhavan, that NEP 2020 is an amalgam of high rhetoric clouded by implementation uncertainty because of its conspicuous failure to make a clean break with bureaucratic control and command. Also, the elephant in the room is the budgetary allocations required to implement this policy. In 1966, the Kothari Commission said double public spending on education to 6% of GDP. In 1986, NP said the same. 34 years later, NEP 2020 is saying the same. It shouldn't be 34 years later, a new policy says the same. Now is the time more than ever, when Indian education is struggling to recover from the blows of this deadly pandemic, that we need to keep the pressure of public opinion on the government to raise public spending on education to 6% of GDP to realize this grand vision. And most importantly, I think the time is now also for the NEP 2020 to course correct itself and take on board this country's greatest asset, which are our private schools, and take them on board and acknowledge their contribution and seek their support and cooperation to implement this grand vision. Over to you, Isha. I'd like to thank all our panelists, Nurain, Damodarji, Kulbhushanji, and Dr. Vora, for this great, insightful discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, on the behalf of Mindler and all the participants who've been listening to you, I've been listening to every word, and I also read a lot of comments, but I must say this was much needed.
it's because we say India is a democratic country, freedom of speech, number one, and constructive criticism is very important, is the backbone of society. So it's constructive criticism is very important. And it's not that you are saying the last word as far as education policy is concerned. You're also raising your concerns. You're saying that great, as Noreen said, it looks like a beautiful vision document. We will only wait and watch that it is implemented in the right spirit and we take all the stakeholders along. Thank you, Sumaya, for being with us. Bhavin, as usual, thank you. Can't thank you enough. Kulbhushan ji, there was a very, much needed thought required from the last mile and the last student who needs to be touched. Damodar ji, very practical, is the government and private part, and Dr. Amrita, purely from a teacher's perspective, beautiful thoughts. And Noreen, can't thank all of you enough. We are deeply indebted for you to spend quality time, precious time, all of you. And participants, I'm taking the opportunity to thank them on your behalf. Over to Isha. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dikshit ji, for this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, PD, for thanking everyone. And the chats are just going on and on. Everyone has enjoyed themselves. They want to interact more. So it's been a thoroughly engaging session. Everyone has absolutely enjoyed themselves. So thank you so much to all of you for joining in today. Thank you, Sumya, Bhavin, and all the panelists for joining in. I would also like to thank all our attendees. I would like to thank all the attendees who've been attending for the past 2 days for like 10 hours on each day. So thank you so much for joining in. It's been a pleasure to have all of you. And we look forward to staying in touch with all of you.
Isha, I'd just like to end on one very positive note. Please, all panelists, please understand, we are eternal optimists, all of us, including our great panelists, okay? In fact, they are the ones who are going to make the last impact and the social impact, each one of them. So we are all optimists. However, we are also trained to give constructive criticism. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye. Bye.
Bye. Are we off live now?
Yeah.
Still live.
All right.
Live.
Yeah, we're just going off live.
Great.
Great. I'll wait for my guests to leave. We'll connect again.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Take care.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Noreen. Thank you, Kulbhushan ji. Thank you, Dr. Amrita.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Bhavin ji.
Stay safe, please.
To all the panelists.
Right. So with our
Take
guests
care.
on, we'll take, I have earned myself maybe 1 or 2 hours of music and book reading today. I'm going to enjoy, and all of you have fun, spend some quality time with your family, the most important part of our life. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, PD.
Thanks, Prateek. All the best and stay in touch. Bye-bye.